Hello and welcome to the next edition of the BriefingsDirect Voice of the Innovator podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on the latest insights into container disruption trends and optimal use strategies. Container-based deployment models have rapidly gained popularity across a full spectrum of hybrid IT architectures, from edge to cloud to data center. IT operators are now looking to increased automation, orchestration, and compatibility benefits to further exploit containers as a mainstay across their next-generation hybrid IT estate. Stay with us now as we examine innovative container use cases and the escalating benefits that comes with broad container use. We're here now to discuss that with Robert Christensen, evangelist in the Office of the Chief Technology Officer at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Welcome back, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Dana.
Delighted to have you with us. Containers are being used in more ways and in more places. What was not that long ago sort of a fringe favorite certain deployment use case model has become broadly disruptive. How disruptive have containers become and why?
Well, it's the change in the paradigm. So we are looking to accelerate software releases. This is the agile motion. At the end of the day, software is consuming the world. And if you don't release software quicker with more features more often, you are being left behind. The mechanism by which you would do that is to break them out into smaller consumable segments that we can manage. And typically that motion right now has been adopted at the public cloud level on containers, and that is spreading into the broader ecosystem of the enterprises and private locations, private enterprise data centers and other places similar to that. That is the fundamental piece while containers have served that purpose.
And Robert, they are, of course, of interest to that development and deployment advantage. But there's also operational advantage, particularly in terms of being able to move workloads more freely across multiple clouds and hybrid clouds.
That's exactly right. So the idea was twofold. First off was to just give me agility, give me motion. And then people started asking themselves, well, I want to have choice too. So as we start abstracting away the dependencies of what runs a container, such as a very focused one that might be on a particular cloud provider, I can actually start saying, hey, can I write my container platform services and APIs that are compatible across multiple platforms? Now you're going into that, how do I go between platforms? How do I go between on-prem or in the public cloud?
And there are also benefits in that because they can be tailored to the specific environmental requirements to say, what services are needed to run this particular service at this time. They can extend down to the edge. They can be used in a very, resource-constrained environments.
Yeah, and more importantly, they can have sizing issues too. So think about pushing a container that's very lightweight into a car that needs to have a high availability of consumption of compute, right, but maybe limited on storage. So you've got these lots of different use cases. So as you collapse the virtualization of an app, okay, that's what a container really does. It virtualizes app components. It virtualizes app parts and dependencies. And as you start pushing these things and you only deploy that smallest bit of code that you need to execute that one thing, whether it's very close to the edge, like in a hospital, or whether you're on a telecommunications on a cell tower, whether you're pushed out into an automobile or on a manufacturing floor, or you want to do multiple pieces inside a cloud platform where you're servicing a large telco, such as a big cell provider, right? However you structure it, you got that flexibility.
And we know that this is a very popular model because the likes of VMware, the leader in virtualization, are putting a lot of emphasis into containers. They don't want to lose their market share. They want to be in the next game. And then Microsoft with Azure and Azure Stack are now also talking up containers more than I would have expected. So that's kind of the proof point, right? When you got VMware and Microsoft agreeing on something.
Yeah, that was really interesting, actually. So I just saw this little blurb that came up in the news about Azure Stack kind of switching over to a container platform. And I went, wow, did they just put in some 3 or 5 years worth of R&D? I mean, heavy like that. They're basically saying, we might be switching over to how we do this to another platform, which is the right thing to do. No one saw Kubernetes coming. Nobody. And then some people did. OpenShift did, obviously, right? But here's the reality is that this thing suddenly came out of nowhere, an adoption. It was been there for a while, but it's never been adopted like it has been.
And Kubernetes is an important part of this because it helps to prevent complexity and sprawl from getting out of hand. It allows you to have a view over these different disparate deployment environments. So tell us why Kubernetes is, in a sense, an accelerant to containers and not necessarily the other way around, or maybe the relationship will change.
Well, it's really important to understand what Kubernetes is fundamentally doing. It's an orchestration platform that allows you to take containers and put them in the right place, manage them, shut them down when they're not working or having behavioral problems. We need a place to orchestrate, right? And that's what Kubernetes was meant to be. It basically displaced a number of other private, what we call opinionated orchestrators. There was a number of them out there that were working. And then Google released Kubernetes, which was fundamentally their platform that they've been running their world on for 10 years. And they're basically doing for this ecosystem what the Android system did for the cell phone, all right? They're releasing and open sourcing the operating model, which is an interesting move.
And it's very rapidly become the orchestration mechanism to rule them all. This has really become a de facto industry standard.
It really has. And that's the part where I was saying to the people who are looking at this motion, we have not seen a technology platform gain acceptance in the ecosystem as fast as this. This is Well, you and I are probably around the same time frame here, Tina. So I don't know if you've seen this before, but I personally, in my years or decades, have not seen something come up this fast.
No, I agree. And the fact that everyone's all in now is very powerful. I'm even wondering how far this orchestration model will go beyond containers, perhaps into other aspects of deployment infrastructure management.
Well, yeah. Well, let's take the next step, right? What would be a code snippet or if you're familiar with functions or with Lambda, right? So you're talking about that. That would be the next step of how does this orchestration allow me to just run code only? I don't care about a container. I don't care about the networking. I don't care about any of that stuff. Just execute my code.
So functions as a service, serverless gets people really sort of used to that idea. Maybe you don't want to buy into one particular serverless approach versus another, but we're starting to see that idea of much more flexibility in how services can be configured and deployed, not based on a platform, not based on an operating system, not even based on a cloud.
Yeah, you nailed it there, man. So if you really think about what the stepping stones are to get across this space, right? It's a dynamic fluid space. Containers are becoming, and I would bet a large bet, okay, that they will be the next level of abstraction and virtualization that's necessary for the evolution of application development to go faster. That's a given, I think, right now. That the what is it? Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point, right? I think we've hit the tipping point. Okay, so this is going to happen. It may take a while before all the ecosystems change over, but then what's the next, and what's the next, and what's the next? So as you're putting a strategy together, if you're a decision maker, you're making decisions about what I do, your container strategy matters. It matters now, not a year from now, not 2 years from now. It matters now.
And the flexibility that containers and Kubernetes give us refocuses the emphasis of how to do IT. It means that you're going to be thinking about management, and you're going to be thinking about economics and automation. You're thinking at a higher abstraction than just developing and deploying applications and then attaching and integrating data points to them. So what are we now looking at? How does this higher abstraction of managing a hybrid estate benefit when we can release ourselves from dependencies like what containers do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I believe that we are moving into a state where you cannot run these platforms with manual systems or ticketing-based systems or what's my cab going to be for the next week or next 2 weeks, that type of thing. You cannot do that. We have so many systems and so many interoperability between the systems. There has to be some sort of anatomic or AI-based platforms that are going to not so much make decisions, but move the workflow for you, okay? So there'll be someone who'll make a decision. Let's say a ticket goes through and it says, hey, here's the problem I have, and someone approves it, and then a workflow naturally happen behind that. So these are the evolutions, and containers allow you to continue to decompose the pieces that cause you problems. All right. Right now, we have big, hairy problems, and we have a hard time nailing down where they are. The more you can start breaking these apart and start looking at your hot spots of areas that have problems, you can be more specifically focused on solving those. And then you can start using some intelligence behind it, some actual workload intelligence to make that happen.
So the good news is we have lots of new flexibility, microservices, very discrete approaches to combining them into services and workflows and processes. The bad news is that we have all this flexibility across all of those variables. Okay, so auspiciously, we're also seeing a lot of interest and emphasis in what's called AI ops, artificial intelligence-driven IT operations. So how do we now start to rationalize what containers do, but keep that from getting out of hand And as you say, we can start using programmatic and algorithmic approaches. I want to have these parameters. I want to have these lanes set and gutters that don't let the ball veer off into the next bowling alley. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing when we combine AI ops and containers.
Yeah, so those are kind of like, what happens when I mix my oranges with my apples, right? So it's kind of an interesting dilemma, but I see what we're really... I can see why people would want to say, hey, how does my container strategy help me manage my asset base, right? How do I get a better outcome? And the reason is because it enables you to collapse the stack. When you take complexity out of your stack, meaning that what are the layers in your stack that are necessary to operate and give an outcome, you have the ability then to remove complexity. So we're talking about dropping the container all the way to bare metal, right? And so if you can drop to bare metal, now you've taken not only cost out of the equation, now you've taken some complexity out of the equation. Now you've taken some operational dependencies out of the equation, and you start reducing those. So that's number one. Number two is that you have to have some sort of service mesh across these things, right? So with containers comes a whole bunch of little teeny hotspots over the place, and those little hotspots, you got to know where they are, right? And if you don't have an operating model that's intelligent enough to know where those are, that's called a service mesh, where they're connected to all these things, you're not going to have autonomous behaviors over the top of that will help you get there. So yeah, you can connect the dots now between your containers and how do I get autonomous, but you got to have that layer in between that's telling me where are my problems, and then you have intelligence above that says how do I handle it.
All right, we've been talking, Robert, at a little bit at an abstract level. Let's maybe go a bit more to the concrete. Are there some use cases and examples that HPE is working through and working with customers on that illustrate a couple of points that we've been making around that flexibility, around the opportunity to manage with Kubernetes or with the orchestration to prevent it from spinning out of control? Where is this gaining traction, and not just in an abstract sense?
Yeah, so I just met with the team that are working with a client right now, a very large Fortune 500 company, where they're applying this exact functions that I just talked to you about, right? So the first thing that has to happen is that they have to put in place a development environment where they're actually developing code in a solid CI/CD DevOps practice. And we use the word practice, right? It's like medical and law. It's a practice. Nothing's permanent like that. So we put that in place for them. The second thing is, so they're actually starting to release code at speed. This is the first goal. Once you start releasing code at speed with containers as the mechanism by which you're doing it, then you start saying, okay, now my platform on which I'm dropping it on, so I'm going through dev, QA, integration, and then finally production. By the time you get to production, you really need to know how you're managing your platform, right? So it's a client evolution. So we are in that process right now from end to end to take one of their applications that is actually net new and another application that's a refactor. And they're running both through this channel. Now, most clients we engage right now are in that early stage. They're doing POCs. They have some. I think there's a couple of companies out there that have very large Kubernetes installations that are in production, but they're born in the cloud companies. And born in the cloud companies have an advantage, right? They can build that whole thing I just talked about from scratch. And that gives them the opportunity to do that. But 90% of the people out there today, what I call the crown jewels of applications, have to deal with legacy. They have to deal with what's going on today. Their data sources have gravity. They got to deal with this stuff. So those are the people I really care about. I really do. Because I want to give them a solution that goes to that place. So that's what we're doing with our clients today, is getting them off the ground, getting them into a place that works.
And how is containers different than a public cloud hyperscaler model of cloud first, native cloud first types of mentality when it comes to addressing the legacy? How can we take legacy applications and deployments and then use containers as a way of giving them new life, but not, lifting and shifting and going through a terrible, difficult process? It can be very expensive to get there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the organizations have to make some key decisions on investment, right? So this is all about where is the organization in its investment life cycle? Which ones are they going to make bets on, and which ones are they going to build new? So we are involved with clients that are going through that process, and what we say to them we say, hey, there's a set of applications you're just not going to touch. They're done. Best we can hope for is put the whole darn thing in a container, leave it alone, and then we at least get it in a container, we can manage it better. So that's about cost. That's about economics and about performance. That's it. There's no release cycles, nothing like that. The next set of ones are legacy applications that can I do something that's going to help me out? Maybe I can take a big, beefy application and break it into 4 parts. Okay, make a service group out of it. That's called a refactor, some fundamental like that. Now that really will give them a little bit of agility because they can only release code pieces for each segment. And then there's the ones that are going to rewrite. all of these are dependent on one thing, and that is what we call app entanglement. They may have multiple dependencies on other applications to give them data feeds, to give them connections that are probably services, right? They have API calls or just direct calls into them that allow them to do this, and there's all sorts of middleware, and it's a gnarly mess. And so if you try to move those applications to public and try to refactor them there and stuff like that, you introduce what I call data gravity issues or latency issues. You have to replicate data, and now you got all sorts of cost problems and governance problems. It just doesn't work. So you have to do it in their data centers. You have to give them a platform by which they can do it there. And if you can't give it to them there, you got a real problem. All right. So what we try to do is break those applications apart in ways where the teams can work in cloud native methodologies like they're doing in public, but they're doing it on-prem. That's the best way to get it done.
And so the decision about on-prem or in a cloud or to what degree a hybrid relationship exists isn't so much dependent upon cost or ease of development. We're now able to start rationalizing this on the best way to leverage those services, use them together, and then also have backwards compatibility, but being future-proof too.
Yeah, so you're really nailing it right here, Dana. So the key to this is really thinking about where does this app appropriately need to live? And you have laws of physics that you got to deal with, and you've got legacy issues you got to deal with, and you've got cultural issues that you got to deal with, right? And then you've got all sorts of data, what we call data nationalization, right? So GDPR and where does all this stuff going to live? And then you've got edge issues, and then this goes on and on and on and on. So getting that right, or at least having the flexibility to get it right, is a super important aspect of this. And it's not the same for every company. Everybody's different.
And we've been addressing, Robert, the containers mostly through an applications discussion. Is there a parallel discussion about data? Can we start thinking about data as a service and not necessarily in a large traditional siloed database, but perhaps a bit more granular, more as a call, as an API? What is the data life cycle and data ops implications of containers, perhaps as they get more mature?
Well, here's the big what I call the Achilles heel of the container world is that it doesn't handle persistent data well at all. So one of the things that HPE has really been focused on is providing stateful, legacy, highly dependent, persistent data stores that live in containers. That is a unique IP that we offer that I think is really groundbreaking for the industry. And so what you think about that is that Kubernetes is a stateless container platform, which is appropriate for cloud native, microservices, fast agile motions. The legacy world is stateful, it's highly persistent data stores, and they don't work well in that stateless environment. They just don't. So through the work that we've been doing over the last several years, specifically with a company called Blue Data, we've been able to solve that legacy problem. And we put that platform into the AI, ML, Ops, big data area first to really flesh that out. So we're moving that together, and we're joining those two systems together and offering what we believe is a platform that's going to really be useful out in the marketplace.
Another aspect of this is the economics. So one of the big pushes from HPE these days is everything as a service, being able to consume and pay for things as you want, regardless of the deployment model, whether it's on-prem or hybrid or in a public cloud or multi-clouds. How does the container model that we've been describing align well with the idea of as a service from an economic perspective?
As a service is really, I want to get my services when I need it. That's at a very basic level. How do I get what I need when I need it? And I want to only can pay for what I need at the time I need it. And I don't want to overpay for it when I don't use it. And I don't want to be stuck without something when I do need it. So solving that problem inside various places in the ecosystem is a different equation. It comes up differently. Some clients want to buy stuff. They want to capitalize it and just put it on the books. So we got to deal with that. You have other people who say, hey, I'm willing to take on this hardware burden as a financer, and you can rent it from me. You can consume only the pieces that you need. And then you've got the cloud providers as a service. But more importantly, let's go back to how the containers in this world allow you to have much finer granularity about what it is that you're buying. And if you want to deploy an app, maybe you're paying for that app to be deployed as opposed to the container, but the container is the encapsulation of it, and where do you want to have it? So you still have to get to what I call the basic currency. Basic currency is a container. Where does that container run? It has to run either on-prem or in the public cloud or on the edge. And if people are going to agree on the currency model, we can agree on an economic model.
If people are risk averse, I don't think they're in trouble by making some big bets on containers as the currency and getting the capabilities and skills around both containers and Kubernetes. Recognizing that this is not a big leap of faith to start recognizing that I need, as an organization, to get good at containers and really get some people who are skilled with Kubernetes. What would you advise people right now to get ready? We've been talking a little bit sort of future-oriented, but what steps should people be taking now to make sure that they don't get caught flat-footed when it comes to containers and especially Kubernetes overseeing and orchestrating it?
Get your arms around the Kubernetes installations you already got, because you know they're happening. Okay, this is just like the public cloud, right? There was shadow IT going on at the time. You know what's happening. You know people are writing code and they're pushing it into a Kubernetes cluster. They're not talking to any of the central IT people about how to manage or run it, or even if it's going to be something that they can handle. So you got to get a hold of them first. Go look, go ask, go find your hand raisers. That's what I always say. Who are the volunteers? Who's got their hands in the air? Openly say, hey, come in. I'm forming a containers, Kubernetes / new dev model team. Give it a name. Call it the Michael Jordan team of containers. I don't care. But go get them. Go find out who they are, right? And then form and coalesce that team around that knowledge base. And how do they think that this best going to happen inside your own culture? This culture. And do it in the public so people can see it. This is why people got such black eyes when they were doing the first stuff around public cloud, because they snuck off and did it. And then they were really reluctant not to say anything. Bring it out in the open. Let's start talking about it. Next thing is then start looking for instantiations of applications that you're either going to build net new or you're going to refactor an application, and decide on your container strategy around that Kubernetes platform, and then work it as a program. Be open about transparency about what you're doing. Make sure you fund it. And more importantly, above all things, know where your data lives. If your data lives on-prem and that application that you're talking about is going to need data, you're going to need to have an on-prem solution for containers, specifically those that handle legacy and public at the same time. So if that data decides to go to the public, you can move it there.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring containers as the new currency and how that's being a disruptive force, but also has a lot of opportunity for improving the way IT and operations work. And we've learned how IT operators are innovating around more automation and orchestration in order to take the full advantage of what containers offer as well as Kubernetes offer. And we've also heard about how intelligence and AI ops can be brought to bear when things start to get scale intensive. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Robert Christensen, evangelist in the Office of the Chief Technology Officer at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this sponsored BriefingsDirect Voice of the Innovator Containers Trends and Use Strategies interview. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at InterArmor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise supported discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your community and do come back next time.